Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
Stewart, what kind of things do we have to do to have the Canadian economy recover from the pandemic?
Well, this is an interesting question right now because there's a whole lot of public policy talk going on right now. There's lots of ideas. People are coming forward with various positions on how we should get past this historic decline in employment that's had repercussions through the whole economy. My tendency in anything is to look at what's working and look at what's not working. And I would tend to say, I think, common sense approach here is let's find what's working for us and do more of that. And then on the experimental side or things that aren't working, let's do less of those things, especially where you see a crisis moment like we're in, where quarter after quarter we're going to be looking at very, very much reduced economic growth, which translates directly into jobs and income for people, which is what it's all about. So, I think it's also a moment of stress. People have been cooped up for months. We've been seeing, these protests recently. They have many issues that are being talked about, but I think there's an element there that everyone's sensing of just anxiety. People need to express themselves. They are pent up. So this is the setting in which we're talking about economic recovery, and I think it's not surprising, therefore, that it seems like a day doesn't pass when you have some new proposition come forward that's competing for our attention. We are hearing all kinds of terms about a different approach to the economy, which of course is risky and unknown. But you have it described as a just recovery. I'm not sure what that means. Is it like just desserts or what? But you're hearing about resilient recovery, also another new term that a lot of people won't be familiar with. It goes into I guess you'd say, the green basket. I think we need to be green, but I think when you have people talking exclusively about the only value that we can look at in economic recovery is how green is it? Well, define green. Right now we have a natural resource sector in Canada, and this is what I study most of all, that is by numerous measures the greenest in the world. Whether we're talking about oil and gas or agriculture, mining, forestry, it's partly because of our regulations. We have to be green, but also I think people want to be green and are willing to invest in it, and investors from in the country and abroad see Canada as having rational, meaningful regulations that apply to things, which is important when you want economic stability. So we've got all these things in spades. We are a green economy already. Let's celebrate that, and then do the things we need to do to ensure there's a fast recovery. Recently I think there's evidence that there's maybe a shift in mood by some people who've been polarized in this. I come at it from a very middle of the road perspective, but you do see that there's a lot of partisanship where issues have become kind of identified with different political parties, and then they're campaigning on it with different views. I think from the point of view just the average working person, that's not as exciting or as engaging as simply knowing that your mortgage is something you're going to be able to carry for another 5 years. People want stability, and when you look at what gives stability to the economy, it comes from jobs that pay well and are permanent in nature. And right now, the jobs that pay the most are ones, if you're talking about industry, are ones in the natural resource sector, particularly mining and oil and gas, but also the jobs that depend on those activities. And that depends in all kinds of different ways, whether it's transportation, logistics, whether it's professional services, whether it's education and healthcare even. All of these things are affected. You know, we've done the studies at ResourceWorks. We've seen the linkages. There is a strong effect. So everyone benefits, in other words, when you've got this done successfully. And this comes back to why I'm, a little bit concerned about those in elected office who are considering policies that they can impose from where they are, or laws that could be influential in how we go through the recovery. Because if we get it wrong, we're looking at an industry. Just take oil and gas. One job produces over $1 million of economic value per year, of GDP value. Just one person working in that sector directly. And you compare that to, I don't want to denigrate other jobs that are much less so, but there are jobs that are 1/15 as large in the income they create for the country, Jim. And the people in those jobs, they can earn a good living, but they'll never earn as much as they would if they're working in something that's a high-skilled area that is connected to the export economy, because it's exports that bring in the money, and that's really the simple explanation why these jobs, whether they're in a glass tower in downtown Toronto or Vancouver, or whether they're on the side of a mountain in northern BC, they do have that in common. They pay decent wages that you can afford to raise a family on. And when you see some of the shifts happening right now, I was quite interested. There's a couple of ministers who are fairly new in their posts in the federal government. We have Catherine McKenna. She got to be quite well known as Environment Minister. Well, she's moved on to another portfolio now. She's in charge of infrastructure. And I think a lot of people would identify her for her consistent green messaging and climate agenda. That seemed for a long time like that's all she talked about. But I think as the realities of the economic situation we're in now begin to present themselves, there's a little bit of maturity. I was looking at comments from Minister McKenna that she gave in an interview with the National Observer a couple of days ago. She's saying whole communities are built around fossil fuel as an industry. And if we forget this, she doesn't know how we'd be able to make the energy transition that she talks about a lot, the transition to having fewer emissions in the energy mix. That's quite a change. And she's also noted that a lot of people are worried about jobs. So I think there's a recognition that things are so stressful right now that even those who've been talking about kind of one side of it are now starting to realize that you can't leave significant part of the Canadian population out on the street, unemployed, and somehow be happy about that. Now, there's a lot of people advocating for different positions that would do exactly that. I mean, these are the ones we have to watch out for, because they are not friends of the working person. They are pursuing rather often speculative solutions that benefit their funders or what have you. But I am also looking at other parts of the federal cabinet where they make these decisions. We have a new natural resources minister, Seamus O'Regan. He's from Newfoundland, where they have background of fisheries and in recent times oil and gas, Hibernia, very rich offshore oil and gas industry. And he's talking now. He gave a great podcast with Peter Terzakian at Energy File, which is a podcast and publications group out of Calgary, run by Peter Terzakian, who is a gifted understander of energy issues. And they were talking about this yesterday. He is talking about a technological moonshot that will allow Canada to transform itself into this sort of low emissions country in future that still has its traditional industries. Now, if you can make that happen, then we will be able to have it all, really, as a country, which I think is what everyone expects is going to be possible. Even those advocating for a much changed economic structure are not talking about how that could, if done poorly, mean a greatly reduced standard of living, because people don't want that. I don't think people will vote that or keep governments in office that are pounding down our quality of life. Not acceptable. So you've got to find the balance. And so talking about the moonshot, where he's referring, of course, to the, what was it, about an 8-year period, the Apollo project, Jim? You'll remember this, where it was determined that people should be on the moon, and we're going to get them there. And they set out with that goal, and they actually, of course, pulled it off in a very short time. So when you have sufficient motivation and money, you can do anything, I think, is the message here.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Cypress Development Corp is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, I interview people all over this little blue planet, and many countries are very jealous of Canada. They said if anybody can bounce back from all of this, it should be Canada, because we have natural resources other countries have dreamed of having but don't, and they have to get them from Canada. Why should we ignore something that other countries don't have? And that's bountiless natural resources.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true that you could not point to another country on the face of the earth. You know, maybe Russia comes close in some way.
Maybe Russia, that's it. And they're, what, 5 times bigger than us, or 3 times?
Immense country, and they are enthusiastically pursuing the opportunities available to them. I think at present, the oil and gas sector in particular is going gangbusters. They're building another great, big, huge new pipeline to China, which for them, you know, they're a land neighbor of China, and so it's not physically too challenging to do that, and they'll be building more of those in future. Every pipeline they build will be, in a sense, an opportunity that Canada is not able to pursue with that part of the world. And so they continue to eat our lunch because we've been so slow to develop the physical infrastructure we need to get our products to market. The Trans Mountain project is now progressing well, but it will, even when finished, only be a partial solution to ensuring that when we develop, especially a non-renewable resource, we get the highest value for it. It's almost like a moral imperative that we should get the most out of that one-time benefit of extracting that resource and selling it. Instead, because of forces that seem to be beyond our control, we're forced to be a kind of economic colony of the United States. You know, it's sort of frustrating for workers, investors, business owners in Canada to see this sort of forced servitude to American interests to keep their energy cheap and accessible, but prevent us from getting top dollar for it, even though the United States itself actually changed federal legislation that was preventing it from selling its own oil and gas resources abroad for decades. That was in place. They reversed that under Obama, and now they are at times a net energy exporter, something that we can't do except selling to the United States. So it's immensely frustrating. It is sometimes cast as an environmental issue. It's not. the oil and gas will be consumed in the markets where it is, whether it's coming from Canada or not. It's really how does Canada be forced to continue as an economic colony of the U.S. is what this is about. I know those who are in environmental movements would say, no, you're wrong. It's about the environment. That's just not convincing at all. And so this is what we're fighting against as a country. How do we free ourselves? This is part of, I think, the long post-colonial phase for Canada. We freed ourselves from being directly controlled by Britain, both starting with the British North America Act, 1867, coming through decisions in the 1930s that began to further free us up, followed by repatriation of the Constitution. We're really now a full-fledged country in every sense, except for the fact we are this subservient market for the U.S. And so over time, as we have the pipeline capacity to the coast, as we allow parts of the north, like Prince Rupert, it's quite amazing what's going on there, very quietly, out of notice. The terminals and the rail capacity that's been put into place to allow not only goods to come in from abroad, but also to leave through ships. It's a remarkable achievement what they've done up there. So over time, we as a country can realize our potential in order to maintain our quality of life here and let people like you're talking about who look from afar and admire the way we've done things to keep doing it, because right now we're because of lost investment opportunities and some regulations that have gotten out of hand, we're kind of choking at. I mean, you can look at some areas that are relatively good. There's some bright spots in mining in the country, not everywhere, but some. But there's also threats. You look at forestry right now. There's a movement to prohibit old growth forestry on Vancouver Island, and once you get into it, beyond the big tree campaigning that goes on, and everyone loves those trees when they buy the calendar to support the protest, but they may not understand the nature of the managed forests out there, how land is protected, how much over the years has been put into parks and protected areas. It seems like it's never enough, that can be done, and it just never stands still, which is difficult for industry, for communities that rely on these businesses. I was just talking with someone from a small city in BC this morning who was telling me they did a count of how much the local forest companies spend in the community, and even the people in the forest companies were astonished at how much it was. I mean, small companies, hundreds of thousands, but even a mid-sized company could have $3 million payroll and spend as much again on the goods and services they buy in their community. Whether it's tires from the tire company or food catering for their camp, or all kinds of things. You think about all the vehicles and the equipment they use, the fuels they use. It's kind of quiet and out of sight, but it drives a very significant number of BC communities.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, how important is it to include Indigenous populations in the economic recovery?
Yeah, well, that's interesting timing, because Sunday was Indigenous Peoples Day. It was a moment for all Canadians to reflect on what it means to be in a country that's got the not only the marvelous natural resource legacies we've been talking about, but also the Indigenous population that is directly rooted to 10,000 plus years of continuous habitation of these lands, and the stewardship of that, the culture of First Nations that is such a marvelous thing. When I get to travel around Canada, especially in BC, wherever I go, I get to meet First Nations leaders who are trying to deal with the interesting problem of wishing to maintain culture and language that is ancient, but also be part of the modern world, where having transportation, having homes that are healthy, having children who look forward to life with enthusiasm and are going to get the educational achievements they want to have. You know, balancing those two things, it's probably the hardest but least noticed job in politics in Canada, is being an elected representative in the First Nations community. I just have the greatest admiration. But you know, when you get into the more technical aspects of managing this, it's incredibly complicated. And you think governments are just the friends of First Nations. It's also very complicated there, because there's conflict and struggle. There's a new report out actually from Moody's Investor Service, the people who look at bonds and things. They called it "Focus on Indigenous Rights, Increasingly Vital for Project Execution." And here's a couple of observations. Number one, the absence of social license from the relevant Indigenous communities can be credit negative for corporations. So what does that mean? Well, if you're trying to build a project, you know, be it a mine or a pipeline or anything, in an Indigenous community or a place where Indigenous people have some kind of territorial claim, if you don't bring them on side and create social license with them, then that's not just bad for your project, but it can actually produce credit negative risk for corporations. If Moody's is saying this, I'm inclined to believe them. Pretty few people have such unquestioned authority. Here's a second thing they found, is that Indigenous communities objecting to a specific project or activity is an event risk that cannot be determined in advance with certainty. And so, again, it's a credit negative for corporations planning to develop projects. So if you have failed to come to terms with objections and meet the demands of an Indigenous community, that's not just a credit risk for your company, but it's a very specific event risk that the bond raters are going to look at and say, we're downgrading your debt. This is not a problem you want to have if you, as a corporation, are in the bond market. But I think it also speaks to what's common sense and what's right, just natural justice in this. Of course, it makes sense in 2020 that you need to have Indigenous communities embracing a project. And, you know, this is the big trend, I think, of the last decade especially, that I've been watching these issues, the improvement in how much that's done. Look, they've got a third proposal, a third observation here, Jim, from Moody's. Market developments are driving investment in lands that contain commercially desirable and untapped natural resources and where Aboriginal and treaty rights exist. So market developments are saying, hey, you know, what's an example? The Bluefish Shale in the Northwest Territories, there's, I think, 200 billion barrels of oil. Maybe 5% of it is developable. It's considered to be a significant risk, but I don't think it's widely supported. It's supported by local First Nations that I've talked to. You could look at other parts like the oil sands. Mostly, I think the First Nations there are quite happy to be involved in businesses. There are some who definitely are speaking their minds about particular issues, but they see the existence of these activities as being beneficial. That is something that seems to be constantly at risk, though. When there's some issue that comes up, environmental issue, or usually environmental in nature, that can bring forward any issues with Aboriginal concerns on things. So this will be, it's safe to predict the most significant driver of whether investments can go forward. Whether we're talking mineral exploration, just simply the ability to go and explore for minerals, let alone develop mines. And I think we're actually well placed to do it, because you hear this term social license a lot. It's a term that originated in Vancouver from someone who many years ago was studying the development of mines. They were looking at South America, Latin America, South America, more specifically at the local micro level of engaging with communities in mine development, and this is where the term came about. Of course, it's become much bigger in its application now. It is maybe a term that some people are using less because it carries too much baggage. It's too specific to some mining situations. Nevertheless, we all know what it means, and we're going to need to see that as probably the first order of business after it's determined that there is an economic potential in some kind of land area based on exploration knowledge.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. His website, resourceworks.com. His Twitter handle, @SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter @HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.